Good afternoon, or whenever you're watching this. Welcome to Canadian Music in the 80s and 90s A and more. If you like what you're seeing, please subscribe and say you like it. Um, I've actually been trying to set this up for a while. I'm happy to talk to Lee Rosevere. He's a CBC radio personality in Charlottetown, um, and who I consider probably one of the more knowledgeable people on music of any kind. And I've been dying to get him in here to talk. Thanks for coming on here with me, Lee.
Oh, thanks for asking me.
Um, I guess I want to start. How did you get into the business in the first place? Like, you right
In
now
the
you're a
in
producer.
radio,
Yeah.
um, accident. Well, I always wanted to be on the radio playing records. I always wanted to
Mhm.
be a DJ. I have a recording when I'm 3 years old, and there's a photo as well as me kind of surrounded by record players of all kinds in my bedroom. And I would make tapes and talk to myself and play records and sing along and stuff. And so I've always wanted to be on the radio. It was just something I don't know. I never thought I'd get to do it, but and then I kind of got interested in CBC radio in the late 80s, early
Mhm.
90s is when I first discovered it. I was listening to shows like The Entertainers and Brave New Waves, and Mark McLaughlin had a show called Swinging on a Star that I really liked. And so I kind of tried to get into CBC, and it took a long time. I was doing kind of little segments because I met a guy named C. William Smith, who used to produce a show called The Radio Show with Jack Farr. It was on from the late 80s, early. It was on for a long time. I got to work on that show for a couple of weeks. Got to meet Bill, who was the producer, executive producer, and he liked what I did, and he tried to get me in there a couple more times. And because I was working full time at the time in Radio Shack and also at Sam the Record Man, it was hard to kind of carve out time from there to go do stuff for CBC.
Right.
And uh, eventually, I've had a falling out with the management of Sam the Record Man, and I called up Bill, who at that time was doing the show Definitely Not the Opera when Nora
Mhm.
Young was hosting. And I phoned him up and said, I just quit my job at the record store. And he goes, great, come on down. Come back, come see me on Monday. So it's like, all right. So I walk in on Monday, and about a year previous to that, I had just gotten my first computer. So this is around 1998, 97.
Okay.
And because I wanted a digital recording studio in my basement because I was using tape up to that point, and I thought I'll just get a computer and I can do it. So I started teaching myself digital editing. And then when I
Right.
went to see Bill at CBC, he showed me this computer system they were using called Samplitude and said, this is what we're putting the show together on. And he said, do you know anything about digital editing? I was like, yes, I do. So just good timing because a lot of the engineers who had been in CBC up to that point were looking to retire because they did not want to learn a new digital editing system. They were
Yeah.
all analog tape, and that's what they were used to. And here comes this new digital thing they're all going to have to learn. And they were close to retirement anyway, so they all just went, "Oh, sorry, we're out of here."
Yeah.
So I walked in just as they were walking out, and I was able to kind of get a foothold into that thanks to the new digital way things were going. And so I spent a year and a half in DNTO, just working on whatever, doing the show from week to week, whatever they get me to do. And then decided to move. This was in Winnipeg, and then moved to Vancouver, where I had to kind of start over because I tried to get into what was Radio 3 back then, but
Okay.
didn't really work. Didn't happen for some reason. David Wisdom used to be my idol for I don't know if you remember the show Nightlines. It was on CBC.
Yeah, I do actually.
Yeah, Nightlines was my favorite show of all time. And I wanted to work with David, but he was starting to leave the CBC at that point too. So it's just bad timing. I didn't get to work with him very much. But needed work, and they said, we need technicians in the newsroom. And I was like, well, I know nothing about the news and I don't care about current affairs at all. I'm mostly interested in music, but I need to work. So sure. Okay. And then I got into doing the morning show in Vancouver called the Early Edition. And
Mhm.
the host there really liked what I was doing because basically I was bored. I was so bored with like the topics because it was all news and current affairs and I didn't care. So I was like trying to make it interesting for myself. So I started throwing in little funny bits to make the host laugh or just kind of make it interesting for myself or bring in kind of different kinds of music for little transitions between the items. And The host really liked it. His name was Rick, and said again, asked me to come back whenever I was available, and I ended up doing that for continually that they just gave me the job. So that was in around 2003. So I've been with the CBC for about 22 years in total, and worked in Vancouver for 18 years. Got to do a 5 o'clock in the morning show called Earlier. It ran for 4 years, where I got to play whatever I want at 5 o'clock in the morning.
Awesome.
And it was great. And it had there was a total fan base at 5 o'clock in the morning, and they're very loyal.
You wouldn't think so, though, right?
Well, there are a lot of night owls and people who get up early. They get up at 5 or 4 o'clock in the morning, and they have their habitual listeners. They'll put on the radio when they get up. So they were there. So that was fun to do, and then ended up just kind of that got too much for me to do after a while. I got a bit burnt out, so I stopped the show, and then I just did my regular gig, which was still the morning show. And then a position came up here in Charlottetown, and I applied for it, and I got it. So, and I was like, okay, because I was trying to get out of Vancouver because it was coming to a different city. It was much bigger, it was louder, it was noisier, it was more expensive, and not the same place it was when we moved there in 2000. So so I was looking for a change, and Charlottetown, my wife is a huge fan of Lucy Maud Montgomery, so we thought, okay, let's just go. So I always meant to visit here, but I thought, well, now we can live here. So and it just and then we landed in 2018, and it's been almost coming up to 5 years now. And
how long have you been on Mainstreet?
Since I got here, since when I started, Angela Walker was the host, and then she was filling in for Karen Mayer, who had just left, and then Matt Rainey took over about half a year or so before when I got here. And so it's just been the two of us since then. So within the last 4 years, it's just the two of us.
And when did they start? Like I said, I loved listening to the Monday on my way home from work is the greatest.
Oh, the Time Machine.
Yeah.
I did a time machine segment in Vancouver a long time ago. But it was very short. It was like 5 minutes long. Right. And I got kind of burnt out doing that because I had to do so many other things. Vancouver was a very busy building, and things are a lot more calmer here. The pace is a lot different. So I'm able to do more things here. So, and then I just suggested to Matt, said, how about we do like a time machine segment where I'll just play songs from, anniversaries and stuff. He goes, yeah, let's do it. So we've just did it. And it fills 30 minutes of the show on Mondays once a week. So that's why it's good. It's a lot of fun. I get to go back. I mean, I joke it's the column that makes everybody feel old, because it's just nothing but hey, this is 40 years old. So
that's I guess that's what I get a kick out of too. It's funny when you come up and you say something's 35 years old, you're just like, no.
Well, it's like even Nirvana is 30 years old now. 1991 that came out. It's over 30 years old. So people still remember that. And they go no, it couldn't be that old. But it's I mean, I have to remember sometimes that sometimes when we play something on the show that might be a little bit heavy, but just well, if you think about it, Led Zeppelin is 55 years old now. Yeah. So people who were listening to Led Zeppelin in their 20s are now 70. So I don't think we really have to worry about that so much,
For sure. So is the stuff you do on the Time Machine, is that, being you're a big music aficionado, is a lot of the stuff just come off your brain, or do you do a lot of research?
No,
as well?
I do a lot of research. It takes a couple of hours to get all the information. I have a big list of events that have happened for all the months or all the weeks, and once a week I'll just go through them all, and then if one particular if I feel like playing something, I'll just it's the 30th or 40th anniversary of this. I'll try to mark the even number years,
right?
Or 45. But I mean, or it's just looking at everything and also deciding, well, some of the things that I'm interested in, I don't think the audience would be interested in, so I don't mention them, just because it's really niche. And so it's I mean, I'm a huge Jethro Tull fan, I'm a huge Level 42 fan, but it's just it's the 40th anniversary of this Level 42 album that nobody's heard of, so that stuff I don't really do, because I know most people listening to the radio would want to hear something they recognize. You can introduce them to something they don't know once in a while, but you have to kind of add in something that they're going to know. Otherwise, they just tune out.
Well, I would respectfully disagree. I think a lot of people would remember Level 42. They were amazing. Like,
oh well, I mean, there's only a handful of people I've ever met that know that people remember something about you as their great big hit single, but they don't know the band beyond that. And yeah, so yeah, that's okay though. You know, I mean, it's one of my personal favorite bands. So I would happily play a whole half hour of Level 42, but I don't think it would be very popular.
one of the best bass players to ever play the instrument, as far as I'm concerned.
Oh yeah, Mark King, best, and Phil Gould, one of the best drummers. He actually influenced my playing a lot, drum playing, because we listen. There's a great Level 42 album called A Physical Presence.
I know that album very well.
Yeah, that album just kind of like blew my mind open when I think I maybe was about 12 years old when I heard it.
Yeah,
and just that it has influenced my playing to this day of what the things he was doing, and that sent me back into other drummers like Tony Williams,
right,
and all the stuff that Phil Gould was borrowing. So well, you know Physical Presence, so I don't have to tell you how great they are.
No, I don't. Yeah, it's great stuff.
So, and you seem to like a lot of 80s music in particular as well, especially Canadian, but also 80s in general.
I do, yeah. But the other thing I've been getting into, I was actually talking to Laura Yates the other night.
Yeah, I saw that.
And I was actually talking to her. I not only like these 80s artists, but I'm also very interested to hear what they're doing now.
Yeah, Laura Yates was interesting. She started off country. I have her electronic album that she did in the 90s that I really liked. I haven't heard much from her since then. She's probably done a few things here or there, but she's a little bit like Belinda Metz or an artist like Nancy Martinez or something like that, who would do a lot of different kind of like pop stuff, but also in the 90s they would kind of, do other things.
Like a few years ago, before I moved here to PEI, I went to an art festival, and I don't know if you know where Waterdown, Ontario is, but
no,
it's just outside of Hamilton. But I went to there, and Barney Bentall was playing.
Oh yeah.
And he had a new record out, and I picked up the CD, and it's probably some of the best work I've heard him do.
Yeah, and, I saw him play with Sherry Ulrich when I was in Vancouver. The two of them were very good friends. I think Barney was living there at the time, but they had a band together and they put out an album. I guess about 10 years ago now. She's another one I really love. Sherry Ulrich is great. Yeah. She doesn't record albums nearly as much as she should. Yeah. But yeah. So there's the whole. It's hard to keep up with everything sometimes.
It is,
because there's artists that I'll encounter, like Art Bergman just had an album out, and I was like, okay.
That's awesome. Like, it's great to hear that he's still doing it.
Yeah, like disappears for 5 years and then 15 years or whatever, and then suddenly a new album shows up. So or like who was the other band I saw recently that just did something? Can't remember. But anyway, it'll come to me in a sec probably. But yeah, it's hard to keep up with everything.
Well, I've interviewed Blair Packham twice from the Jitters.
Oh yeah.
And I think he's a better songwriter now than he was back then. If you hear some of the stuff he's done like on his own, it's incredible. He's a great songwriter, very good with words. He did a whole album where the Odds were his backup band.
That would be a good album.
Yeah, like he's incredible, and he's a great guy to talk to. He's so knowledgeable about the industry because he got his start like working in recording studios in the first place. So he knows everything about the industry. He's just a fascinating guy to talk to. But yeah, it goes back to, obviously my first interest in some of these bands, and yours is probably back in the 80s and 90s, but I just think it's great if you ever get a chance, listen to what they're doing now.
Yeah, I do try to keep up with a lot of the artists that I'm familiar with, but sometimes, like there was one point I was following Luba, and she put a few tracks on her MySpace, and that was the last thing she had done, and that was maybe about 10, 12 years ago, longer than that maybe, but never officially released, and hasn't put out an album in a long time. But she's still active, but she's not recording anything. So she's still performing, I guess. I don't know if she's performing, but like she's still out there and she's remembered. But it would be nice, it's like if she just released a song, I might not be going to her website every single day, just to use her as an example. And years can go by before you realize that something happened. Like there was I don't know if the band Lost and Profound.
Yes, I do. Yeah.
Yeah. They did nothing for they were they were big in the 90s, and then like maybe 20 years went by and suddenly they just showed up again and said, we have a new album. It's just like, whoa. It's like not expecting that at all. And it's really, really good album. But just like surprises like that, you know, like people like not necessarily being like always like doing something,
Right.
like playing live or something, just suddenly come out with a project. And yeah, it's nice to know when those things happen, but it's hard to keep up.
And we were talking about this a bit before we sort of came on the air, to so to speak. We were talking about Much Music a little bit. Like,
Yes.
I mean, I guess there's not that venue for those Canadian bands that they used to have through Much Music, because Much Music really supported Canadian acts in the 80s and 90s.
They did, independent and Canadian, like all genres of music were well represented by Much Music. I discovered so many great bands through Much Music that
Right.
has not happened since. The only other, like maybe you'd find them on blogs or something, but back in the day before the internet was invented, that was the best way to discover music.
Yeah.
Yeah, and not just Canadian music, but all music. Like I remember once they did a 30-minute, they would do their spotlights where they would show 30 minutes of the same artist.
Yes.
There was one time one of their cameramen was leaving and his favorite artist was Joe Jackson. So they played 30 minutes of Joe Jackson videos. You'd never see that now.
No, not at all.
And
I don't even think MTV would have done that.
Yeah, and I liked Joe Jackson, but that really kind of made me go off and like, well, maybe I should start investigating more of his catalog and stuff like that, or made me a fan of Prince. I was kind of like hit or miss. I didn't really care much about Prince in the 80s, but then Much Music ran the Sign of the Times concert video.
Okay. Yeah.
And I was like, whoa, my impression of this artist has completely like different from what I thought. And then I just went down a crazy Prince rabbit hole after that. So, but those things would have never happened if Much Music weren't around. And the fact we were saying like MTV were like kind of known as like the big ones at the time, but they were so highly produced and edited, and Much Music would just go live. And they did. I've met Denise Donnellan, and I told her once that the Too Much for Much idea was a really great thing. Yeah. And they should have done more of that. She said that they wanted to, but just for some reason or other it didn't work out. But little things like that, you know.
Didn't they do that for the Madonna Like a Prayer video? I think they did that.
It was
where I first
they did
it.
The Justify My Love video. They had
maybe it was that.
Yeah, it was like at 11 o'clock, and they showed the video, and then they had a panel discussion afterwards about the video and everything. And I think I have a tape of it somewhere, but it's probably on YouTube at this point. Speaking of which, I just found a YouTuber who used to work at Much Music, who's been posting clips from stuff he worked on, including Snow Job with Sloan from 1997 just got posted.
Unbelievable. Yeah,
and like all these bumpers and things that he worked on. So
like that was the other thing they used to do. Like they used to go out and record live concerts, like whether it be Snow Job. I remember Spring Break a few times, and
one band I remember I never heard of before, and I went the Look People. Do you remember them?
Roxette?
No, the band was called the Look People.
No, I don't remember them.
James B, who is now a lounge singer, was in the band. The guitarist, I forget his name, Longo High was the guitar player. Kevin from the Bare Naked Ladies, I've forgotten his last name right now. Kevin Hearn, he was in the band.
Okay.
Great Bob Scott was the drummer. They used to be the house band for the Ralph Van Murgy show in the early 90s.
Oh, okay. Right.
Yeah. Anyway, I saw them play. Much Music did a live concert from Daytona Beach, and Look People were the band.
Wow.
And it was it was hilarious, and also so weird to see all these like partying teenagers who were drunk out of their minds watching this band and having no idea what was going on. So, and I was like, I gotta look up this band. And they're kind of like a Red Hot Chili Peppers light Canadian version. Now you go back and listen to it.
Yeah.
But I mean, at the time it was pretty out there, and just their live show was great. I mean, in their live show I liked better than the albums, because they would do things like quote ornithology on a bass guitar solo, you know, like who's going to get that in this crowd, you know, sort of thing.
Yeah. Well, that's
so, but it was good. And like, Much Music were great. I had a lot of fond memories of watching Much Music, and I don't think anything's been as good. I mean, like everything changes, right? I mean, like, nothing's ever been as good as it was, but also I don't think there's anything that has ever been as like important to the scene as Much Music were back then.
Yeah, because they really made a star system out of some of those Canadian acts. Like, I mean, they would have been the first to play a Spoons video or Images in Vogue. Tom Cochrane probably.
Yep.
Um,
Rush was the first
Rush.
video they played. Yeah.
And Pursuit of Happiness is my always a go to that example that
they're a great band.
That video they shot on Queen Street for I'm an Adult Now, the original version, like they put that in heavy rotation. Like
yeah. As they did with the Bare Naked Ladies filmed their If I Had $1 Million in their corner booth, speakers booth.
That's right too.
And they ran that. So yeah, they even like edited together their own video without the band's permission and put it on the air.
Yeah, like it's just incredible what they've done for so many Canadian acts that I can.
Yeah. And I discovered Sarah McLachlan through Much Music.
Oh, for sure. Like, I mean, her videos were played constantly before the Solace came out, when she got.
Yeah, the first thing I saw was the Steaming video when the Vox album came out, and I went, "Wow, I have to go buy this record right now." So, yeah, and you can just happen upon things. I mean, that was the same thing what attracted me to CBC Radio, because you could just put on, especially after 9:00 at night on CBC Radio 2, what they called CBC Stereo back then, which was the David Wisdoms, the Brent Banburys, like all the really out there stuff that would broadcast from 9 till 6 o'clock or 4 o'clock in the morning. And you could put it on I turned on once, they were running a They Might Be Giants concert. And then I tuned in again, and they were playing a Soul to Soul track. And the one that got me the most was the band Jellyfish. I don't know if you remember them.
I do remember. I can't say I'm very familiar with them, but I remember.
I think you'd really like them. They only had 2 albums, Belly Button and Spilt Milk, but they're both awesome records. And I remember I was going through the dial spinning. I hit CBC and I heard something that sounded like Queen, and then I went spinning some more, and I came back to the same station, hit CBC again, and now it sounded like the Beach Boys. And I was like, I was just here 30 seconds ago. What is this? So, and then found out it was the band Jellyfish from the album Spilt Milk. And it was so good. I mean, if you're a fan of any kind of 70s rock, but they're really intellectual about it. And sometimes people don't like them because the references are too on the nose. But I discovered it at a particular time where it really, it was what I needed. So, yeah.
For sure.
So I always like that stuff.
Well, I've always respected what the CBC has done for Canadian music as well. Because we were talking about Laurie Yates before. That's what I found her Ear to the Ground special on YouTube the other day. And I forgot how amazing that show was. I used to love watching that. It really gave artists a good spotlight as well, kind of via what Much Music was kind of doing.
Yeah, there seemed to be a lot more of it back in the 80s, but Much Music was doing it. CBC had been doing it for decades. Like all the variety specials and artists who were, at the forefront of what was going on at the time. So, that's another thing I love about CBC that I'll always adore, is that there's just the whole, when I was in Vancouver, I got into the basement archives. And there I found all these tapes of a show called the Great Canadian Gold Rush. Okay. It was hosted by Terry David Mulligan in the 70s.
All right.
And he did interviews with the Police, Meatloaf, everybody who was big at the time. And they did sessions as well. In fact, I have a couple of the sessions. One of them is an FM session with one of my favorite bands.
National Slash, right?
Yeah, Nash was there, and it was Cameron Hawkins and Martin Deller, the drummer, and it was just a session recorded for CBC, and it hasn't been released. And I was just like, and I have a copy, but stuff like that, we don't really do that anymore. There's been so many budget cutbacks. We used to do live recordings constantly, and now it's all kind of, sadly, it's farmed out to other companies to do, and then we just kind of air it. But we used to record that stuff. I mean, they used to have mobile trucks they had 3 of them at one point that would do nothing. They'd be busy every weekend recording live stuff. So our folk festivals, they would just record everything, so.
I also remember during Canada Day's 125th in 1992, I think it was. They were doing live. They were doing live concerts all day. I
Yeah.
remember hearing it was hosted by, I think it was hosted by like Ian Thomas and Rick Emmett or something like that. I have very vague memory of it, but I remember hearing like the Tragically Hip apparently did a show in like 5 cities across the country all that day.
Oh yeah.
And they had live recording of what they were doing in St. John's in the morning.
Yeah. That was Much Music, or that was CBC?
No, I think it might have been, I don't know, I thought it was CBC, but I'm not 100% sure. But
maybe.
But
it sounds like a very Much Music thing to do.
Radio doesn't do that anymore. Like, I mean, I used to love that. I remember hearing big ticket specials on Much Music, and they'd play the audio of it on a local station in Toronto.
Yeah, simulcasts. Yeah.
Yeah, those were like fantastic, but I guess it's too much money to produce something like that nowadays. But
well, radio has changed a lot. I mean, it's very everything is programmed by computer, unless it's a local CBC regional show.
Yeah.
But like all the national programs are all programmed by computer, and it's the same. It's even worse if you're in a commercial radio spot where it's like there's like Stingray Music who own it, and they program everything for all the cities and across the country. So you're not going to get a big variety of stuff that shows up on there. I mean, because it's all numbers, right? And it's what sells. But
it's cheaper to run it that way, I guess.
Yeah, well, plus they get a bare bones staff because they'll just automate most things. It's really kind of a sad thing. I mean, I have a fondness for all radio up till probably about 1995, 96, when Clear Channel bought everything. It was a definite notice change. Like one of the stations I used to listen to all the time in the early 90s was Q94 in Winnipeg.
Okay.
And they were the commercial pop station of the and they were the only station with a strong enough signal we could reach in the mall at the Radio Shack I worked at.
Okay.
So we used to leave it on all day, and I would hear everything. Like songs that I actually thought were hits were actually not that big because they were just filling their CanCon SOCAN regulations. But you'd hear like some really obscure Canadian artists, some now that still are not on streaming services anywhere.
Yeah.
And some bands, they were just great, but then the music is good. I mean, I stopped listening to it probably around 1994. And I mean, commercial radio back then couldn't touch what, now, no way, One of the other things I did when I got to Vancouver CBC was I went into their record library and I took out all the radio samplers. They were, I don't know if you've seen, they were the CDs, for people who don't know, they're for CDs that were sent to radio stations, have all the latest singles for the month. And they kept all of them. They went back to 1988. So I was able to pull them out and start listening to them. And I was rediscovering all these songs that I used to hear on the radio, but I never knew who the artist was. So I was now able to find out who they were. And now I had a copy of the song as well. So because it was off of CD, which was great because a lot of these things were still not on streaming services. Some are, but or there would be an exclusive radio mix on the sampler that has not been issued. So
Well, another I don't know if you're familiar with any stations in Toronto, but CFNY was a real
CFNY,
They were quite, because I interviewed Alan Cross and he was talking about how they used to break a lot of bands before they got really big commercially as well.
Yeah, my wife grew up in Hamilton. Actually, she used to listen to The Edge all the time. Mm-hmm. So she got her into bands like Juliana Hatfield and Veruca Salt and all the alt 90s stuff. So that's when that was like the kind of like the golden period for alternative music in the early 90s. And then The Edge were right there, and also CFNY. I used to listen to Chum FM when I lived in Toronto. But I didn't hear very much. I couldn't name most of the stations when we lived in Toronto because I was too young. So, but yeah, they were all there. I mean, I have a few buttons, I think, from those days. So that's the only reason I remember them now.
I mean, I'm old enough to remember AM stations were where you got a lot of your top 40 music. Like,
oh yeah, AM stations were everywhere. I mean, FM was the more. Well, I didn't even listen to FM radio probably until the late 80s. Yeah. So up to that point, AM radio was king. So
you must have remembered CKOC used to play top 40 music out of Hamilton, and CFTR. I don't know if you remember them. They were out of Toronto.
No, I don't remember names. I would put on the radio and it'd just be like hearing the songs, and like I'm not even sure how I discovered music. I was collecting records since I was about 5. So I don't even know. I mean, my favorite bands back then were Kiss, the Bay City Rollers, and the Bee Gees. So I would collect and ELO, and I would collect all those records as whatever pocket money I had at the time. But most of the time, I would also listen to my dad's record collection. He had Stevie Wonder. He was from London. Both my parents are from London, and he brought over parlophone versions of Beatle records, and so I had those. And Stevie Wonder's Intervisions is still my favorite record today. Herb Alpert records, a lot of like all over the map, and just whatever I could listen to, any way you could listen to it. I mean, back then the radio was the only way to be exposed to music, and then video in the 80s.
Well, even what CBC does here in Charlottetown too, as well. I've always appreciated the way you guys really support the local artists here. Like,
well, that's a thing here that I found out when I got here. That doesn't happen everywhere.
It doesn't. Really?
No. And when I was in Vancouver, hardly any local artists would get played. They would get, if there was a show coming up, it was a big deal. They would do it, and we did profiles of some local artists and stuff.
Right.
And they would sometimes record concerts, but the focus on local music has never been as fierce here as it is any other place I've been. So, and I think it's always been that way. Like when I got here, Richie Bulger, who's the tech on the morning show,
right.
He's been here he's an institution here, and I learned a lot about like local artists from him, because they all know each other, you know. They all play on each other's gigs and stuff, and Richie would just like, oh yeah, so and so had a record out in like '92. It's over there, you know, like he got it in his bunker somewhere. So or I'll pull out a record I found at the Value Village of a local artist, and I'll be like, well, this looks pretty interesting. And I'll show it to Richie. He goes, oh yeah, I got that. It's like, okay, it's not rare. All right. I mean, it's rare to me. It's just kind of interesting, but like, it's going back into the history of Charlottetown music. There's a lot of bands that never recorded anything. They just play live. Yeah. So that is problematic if they're going to be like doing a gig somewhere. And I said, oh, can we play a song? And he goes, no, they haven't recorded anything. So it's like, okay. So yeah, that's the only problem I find when, especially for older acts.
So would you know anything about how Haywire broke?
Oh, I know Haywire. Yeah. David Rashid, who's the keyboard player, works at CBC sometimes. He backfills. He'll do a backfill for me sometimes. When I first got here, and I was just like, I was told that David was a backfill tech, and I said, David Rashid from Haywire, the Haywire? And he said, yeah. I was like, oh my. And it's like, that's freaking awesome. So yeah, and there was a guy actually in Vancouver, one of the band members from the band Pluto started getting.
Oh really?
Was doing some tech work. He only showed up for a little bit, and then he disappeared again. And Greg from Tokyo Police Club, who lives here, has a studio here, was going to do some stuff, but I think he got too busy with his own recording. I'm not sure what happened there, but yeah, it's funny with like old musicians getting into like tech work at CBC at one point or another. But David's great. I've been to his studio. He's awesome. And Haywire, great.
I saw his daughters last night. They sang the anthem at the Islanders game.
Oh, cool. Yeah, even Lily there. They're very talented. That's a very musical family. They're all great.
Well, I got started doing this. I got pulled into helping with a fan club Facebook group for Stompin' Tom.
Okay.
With 2 other guys. So I got I was kind of like, I want to do some content for this. So I knew a guy back in Ontario who used to play with Tom on tour. And I started hanging out with those guys, and they were pretty good. And I thought, I'm going to try and get as many guys that used to play with Tom and just do interviews with them.
That's a lot of guys.
The stories are incredible. Like this.
I heard some stories. Yeah, when he passed away, when they did a story, and then we talked to somebody who had toured with him, and he says, yeah, there was the evenings where Tom wanted to play checkers, and you're drinking beer, playing checkers with Tom, and you didn't finish till Tom was ready to go to bed. Yeah, it would be like 5 o'clock in the morning. You're still playing checkers and drinking beer with Tom. So, well,
the guy I've really become friendly with. I don't know. Are you familiar with Billy McInnes?
I heard the name, but I'm not that familiar with him.
He's from PEI. He was Tom's fiddle player for 9 or 10 years.
Okay.
He comes back to PEI every summer and he plays Kaylee's with Leon Gallant all the time. But he's become kind of a friend of mine, actually. He does an interview about what he's with me every year just to catch up on what he's up to this in the summer and stuff like that. And he's been a great guy to talk to. He actually came to Stompin' Tom Center this summer,
Oh,
and
cool.
he brought bass player Tim Hadley with him.
Mhm.
Tim Hadley toured with Tom for 13 years and with Billy. So it's
So
cool
you're
to
a
see
big Stompin' Tom fan then.
Oh yeah, well my dad grew up in that end of the island, so he hits close to home with a lot of the songs he used to do when when you see where he grew up, it's the same kind of thing my dad grew up in. So it's kind of hits close to home. But Tim Hadley used to play in punk bands before he got on with Tom. He used to play at the
Okay.
Horseshoe Tavern all the time with a band called the Grievous Angels.
I know the Grievous Angels, yeah.
Yeah, he played with them, with Charlie Angus, who is now a member of Parliament. And I guess Andrew Cash would have been hanging around back then.
I was about to say,
that.
who is also, I think what is he now? What, Andrew Cash, he's a member of Parliament as well?
He was. I don't know if is anymore, but he was for at least a term for the NDP in Toronto.
Yeah, but he's got a political career going now. So,
but he was always one of my favorite musicians too. Another guy you'd only see on Much Music, you wouldn't really see anywhere else.
Yeah. Or other bands like, do you remember Five Guys Named Mo?
Yes.
I loved that band. They only had one album. Yeah, it was a never ending. I mean, discovering all that music from that time period, especially like the late 80s, 90s, like Leslie's Pet Trio, National Velvet, were they?
Yep.
Yeah, it's just like, and oh man, I can't remember half of them now. I'm going blank because it's like there's just too many of them and I'm trying to fit in my brain. But like all of that from that time period, it just felt like there was a lot going on in Canadian music,
Yeah.
And it was very widespread. There was no kind of like we were just doing pop, popular music. And like now, I mean, like the only Canadian artists we hear about are the most famous ones, like The Weeknd, Justin, whatever, that stuff. But or it just feels, I don't know, none of that stuff really, other than that, translated very well. I mean, although I know people in Philadelphia love Triumph.
Yeah, I find out they're
time.
bigger everywhere else but Canada in some spots.
Yeah, people Triumph are not really remembered here, but they're like gods. And if you go to like Ohio or Philadelphia, they just love them there.
Well, I grew up in Mississauga, so I used to see Rick Emmett in the grocery store once in a while when I was a kid.
Yeah, I visited Toronto once back on a family visit after we'd moved away, and I was listening to the radio, and there was like, there was going to be a soccer tournament later that afternoon with Mike Levine from Triumph, and one of the other guys from, I think Alex Lifeson was going to be there too, and I was just like, what? So I didn't go, but like I was like, that's so awesome. So yeah, and Rush are one of my biggest favorite bands of all time. So
yeah, they're one of those bands. I think they're one of those bands, you either love them or you hate them.
A lot of people are indifferent. I know most of them, but I mean, I grew up in Thornhill, so I played.
Okay.
I went to the drum shop a lot, and apparently Neil Peart used to go there too. So I wasn't into Rush at the time. I wish I was, because maybe I'd recognize him, but it wasn't until a couple of years later I got into Rush. But yeah, that was a great drum shop to be in. It was just that whole thing. I went back again on the same visit we went. There was a guy named Tom was my drum teacher when I was in Toronto many years ago. And then he started a recording studio. Tom Adam was his name. Yeah. And we went back to visit him, and he played me some tapes of this band he had recorded called Rapid Tears. It was this like super fast metal band. Yeah. And I was like, okay. But like, just like being in that whole kind of scene in Toronto, I mean, in a way, I kind of wished I hadn't left Toronto that soon, because things happen in Toronto a lot faster than they do elsewhere. And it would have been great to be growing up in Toronto at that time when Much Music was big and all that stuff. I mean, when we left in like 1980 to go to Nanaimo, so kind of missed the boat on that.
Oh yeah. I'm getting back to the Much Music thing, like, and I can't believe they made a star to Stompin' Tom again.
They did.
When they used to play that Margot's Cargo video in heavy rotation.
That was actually the first time I'd seen Stompin' Tom.
like what other station would do that? Like nobody else would have done that.
No, well, I mean, he did. I don't know what the story of him making the video in the first place. I mean, they did intimate and interactives with Joni Mitchell. You know,
Yeah,
and it's
yeah,
like when Interpreted Indigo came out, and like, yeah, they would have never. Nobody else would do that. And yeah, you're right. Margot Cargo's the first video of his that I saw. It was actually my introduction to Stomp and Tom because I was more into progressive rock and pop music, and I
yeah.
wasn't really listening to a lot of folk or country. And so, but when that came on, it was just like, whoa! You're like, or what was it? Junior Brown was another guy they played,
Oh yeah, just
and it was like, whoa, this guy's good. I mean, it's. I'm not much into country, but I like this, you know. So
yeah. I can appreciate anyone who's a good musician, no matter what kind of music it is now. But I mean,
yeah, but
when I
again,
was a
that's something much music played. You know, like I wouldn't have heard it anywhere else.
teenager, if it didn't sound like Van Halen, I didn't care for it at all. But I really got into, thanks to Much Music and CFNY, I really started bending my ear towards things that were different, which
Yeah,
I thank them for, because I really started. And of course, I started discovering bands I never really paid attention to as a kid, like Stevie Wonder. I've heard him in the '80s, of course, but then it made me want to go back and discover
yeah,
songs like "Songs in the Key of Life." What a brilliant album that is! Like,
yeah.
yeah,
When something like that, that's always been there for me since Intervisions. I heard it when I was 5 years old, and
yeah,
it just struck something with me. And of course, I played that album. I didn't get any other Stevie Wonder records for years afterwards, but of course, it's just like, well, he's Stevie Wonder.
I was
So,
actually laughing. I went to a Whiskey Jack concert. Whiskey Jack used to back Stomp and Tom, and they were doing a Canada Day show.
mhm.
And their drummer was, I don't know if you've ever heard of Al Cross.
Alan Cross.
No, not Alan Cross. Al Cross. He's a famous drummer, Canadian drummer. Like he's played with everybody.
Okay, no, I
But
don't
anyway,
recognize his name.
while they were waiting for Whiskey Jack to come on, they were playing the Big Sugar album, 500 Pounds, if you remember Big Sugar.
Yep.
Al Cross played on that album.
Oh, okay. Was he a
And
part of that band or no?
I don't know if he was actually a touring part of that band, but he was the drummer that recorded that
Okay.
album with Gordon Johnson and somebody else. I think it was only three guys that played on that record altogether. But
Hmm.
yeah, here he is. I think he was played with Corey Hart. But he's been
And
a
he's just a
famous,
session guy. Yeah.
yeah, but he's been around he's very well known everywhere
Hmm.
in
He's
music
probably
circles.
one of those guys. I probably have him on a bunch of albums I don't even realize. You know.
Yeah, until you start reading like the liner notes and stuff like that to see who played on it. And you're like, wait a minute.
Mhm.
I guess the first time I discovered that was Robbie Robertson's album, Rest His
Mhm.
Soul. I remember reading that guys from U2 were on that record. It's the one with Showdown at Big Sky. I forgot the name of the album, but
Yeah.
I was reading the liner notes of that. Daniel Lanois produced it, I guess. And
Yeah. I was familiar with him when Peter Gabriel's "So" came out,
right,
and then I was just like, "This is really good." And then noticing his name, and then recognizing connections between him and his brother, I think, or his sister that worked with Martha and the Muffins,
right,
and
right.
then yeah, just that whole thing, and then going on to work with Emmylou Harris, and of course U2, and yeah, I mean, he has his Daniel Lanois sound is so it's so recognizable, but it's perfect for
Right.
those songs. I'm
And
a big fan of
he's
his production style.
from Hamilton. Great guy.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's great to know that a guy like that has done what he's done over the years. It's just incredible. But
Yeah, someone like that who just follows a singular vision of what they want to do, and have their own
right.
way of doing it, then yeah, I mean, if you can take on someone like Peter Gabriel, to do an album like "So," then like, yeah, you have to be a very kind of like strong personality as well.
And that arguably is Peter Gabriel's probably most successful album, I would
It
think.
is his most successful. It's in my top three for sure. But yeah, I went on down a big Genesis, Peter Gabriel, Jethro Tull, King Crimson, prog rock hole. So I've
Yeah.
followed all that stuff. We were right in the middle of it when "So" came out, and it was kind of like a whoa, like, what's this? Like it still had the experimental
Right.
side of him, but it was super commercial. But it was still good. It was kind of like Tears for Fears, Song for the Big Chair, another
Right.
one,
Right.
and Seeds of Love, which is an amazing album. Yeah, there's an artist I follow named Steven Wilson,
Hmm.
who loves that era of music as well. And he tries to, like he says, like, he wants to do the artistically satisfying albums that are still commercially successful.
Right.
And there's like, yeah, there's a window of time where that was actually possible. So yeah, those albums are it.
That was the first big concert I saw was Peter Gabriel.
Oh, which tour?
The So Tour
Oh, wow.
Exhibition Stadium. I remember it was the first big rock concert I ever saw.
Oh, I would love to see that tour.
Oh, it was unbelievable because he had the whole African band out there with him too. It was just unbelievable. It was like, wow, this is so incredible. What an amazing performer he was. Well, he
Yeah,
still is, I'm guessing, but
yeah, I've never seen him live, but there's certain eras of artists that I would love to have seen in their peak, and that's that peak. That's one of them. I would have even
yeah,
seen him like in the early '90s. He was still, very good. Like there's certain artists I love, Brian Wilson, and
right.
but I wouldn't want to see him live, just because
Yeah.
it would just kind of ruin it a bit for me.
Well, the one person I never want to see live is Van Morrison because I've heard he's just so bad live. Like I've heard live
Can't say
recordings.
I can't say I'm much of a fan of Van Morrison. Who was like trying to remember like the best live act I've ever seen was actually Level 42. So
Right.
I saw them on the Running in the Family tour. They came through Winnipeg. It's just
Yeah.
like I don't know why they go through Winnipeg for that tour,
Yeah.
but they did, and I was very fortunate. And that was the best concert I've ever been to. But yeah, I mean, I'm trying to even think of like half the concerts. A lot of stuff. For a while there, I got complimentary tickets from the record store to go see bands play,
Okay.
and sometimes we would go see it. Like they would be like, "Oh, it's Junk House playing at this dive bar at midnight. Do you want to go?" I was like, maybe." So yeah, and then other ones like bigger tickets. We got to see Celine Dion come through Winnipeg, and I even got her to the record rep got her signed a CD booklet of it for me. Which
Oh, that's amazing.
Have. So now I show it to people. And he goes like, "You met Celine Dion?" I go, "No, I didn't, but I have her autograph."
There's nothing wrong with appreciating Celine Dion's talent. I think she's
oh no, I was huge. Well, that was right into that time when I was working at the record store, and it was Unison had just come out, so they were playing the heck out of it, and those songs just embedded in my brain, and I said I have to go buy this album. And then yeah, there were other artists around that time. I'll tell you actually. Do you remember the song "Power Drive" by a band? It was an artist. His real name is Andy Kim.
Andy Kim. Is that the guy I'm thinking of who wrote for the Archies songs?
Yep, same guy. Rock Me Baby, Rock Me Gently, that song.
Okay.
He had a side project, alter ego called Baron Longfellow. Okay. And then it was sometimes in French, and then others it was more soft pop stuff. And then the early 90s, he recorded a song called Power Drive and released it on a cassette single under the name Longfellow. Okay. Q94 played it a bunch of times, and I loved the song. And if you think I could find it anywhere, couldn't find it. Half the time they didn't even say what the song was called. So I thought it was called Power Drive, but I wasn't sure. Anyway, this is in the early 90s, and I'm searching for this song for years, never find it. My wife, at the same time, she's listening to the radio in Hamilton, and she's taping the song off the radio on her ghetto blaster. Right. And wrote down, loved the song as well. So we both know of this song, but neither of us have been able to find a copy of it. And that was in a record store in Vancouver, and there was a place called Apollo Records, and they had an upstairs floor where everything was $1. And somebody had just dropped off about 1,000 cassette singles from 1998 to 1993, and they were all still sealed.
Really?
I bought a bunch of them just because I'm never going to see this format again. And I remember them seeing them on they were like $3.99, $4.99 at the time. So I was never going to buy them for that, but $1, sure. And I went through everything, and I went through it, and I came up with a bunch of cool stuff. And then I went, I wonder if Power Drive's in there. I didn't see it. Then we'll go back, and then I went back and tried to spend another 15 minutes looking through everything, and I found it. Wow. So I paid $1 for the cassette single 20 years after hearing it, and then took it home and I showed it. My wife says, "Look what I found," and she's just like, I finally get Power Drive in the collection. So yeah, I mean, he re-recorded it since and put it on a CD in the mid 2000s, but it's not the same version.
It's not. No.
No, it's just like, no, we want this version, the version that we heard on the radio in 1991. So, but yeah.
Nobody put it up on YouTube or anything like that?
Somebody did, but they from their cassette copy that they taped off the radio. So the quality was terrible.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So I was trying to find it for years, and I finally found it. So there was that. Mary Lou Zahalin, they played her a lot. I loved her. I loved her stuff. Do you know her? She
No.
passed away unfortunately a few months ago. She had two hits with Fallen Angel and I Can't Forget About You were the two hits, and she had only like maybe 3 albums out in her entire career. And she taught mostly singing and things. But they played her. They played One to One a
Okay.
lot.
I remember One to One. I can't
Yeah,
find their stuff anywhere.
exactly. Yeah, there was a label that put out their stuff.
But
Uh,
Leslie Howe was the one that discovered Alanis Morissette, wasn't he?
yeah, Leslie Howe and Louise Renee both worked on Alanis's first album and
Yep.
mostly co-wrote everything.
Yeah.
Um, and then yeah, they were big at the time with their own albums. Imagine It was that's one of those albums that if you were listening to radio back in the early '90s, you would recognize probably about 5 or 6 of these songs, but you didn't know who did them.
Oh, I remember a lot of their songs because I remember Hold Me Now got played constantly on Much Music. I think it was
Yeah,
on like at least twice a day. So
yeah. I mean, there was a ton of like Canadian one-off bands that just did stuff in that time period. That when Q94 played them, I was all over. But it was yeah. I mean, I missed those days, but I'm glad I have copies of everything now. But yeah, I mean, the radio back then was super powerful for listening to like especially Canadian bands. Like
right.
I grew up with that stuff, so now I mention it and people just look at me funny like they've never heard of that before in their lives. So
Yeah. Well, it's like there was a little pub in Mississauga when I was living there. It actually used to be a McDonald's, but it turned into a bar and a pub called the Abbey Road Pub. And I was in there one night and one of the guys from the Partland Brothers was playing in there.
oh, cool.
If you remember the Partland
I have
Brothers.
both their albums. Yeah.
Yeah, I was like, what are they doing here?
Q94 played that was another one that I put on the second Partland Brothers albums that I found for like $1 somewhere on CD, and I put it on not thinking I would know anything, and then Q94 played a few songs off this record. I was like, I know this stuff. Like I think Honest Man was on there.
Yep.
And then there was another one on there. I can't remember. I've got a bunch of them over there, but it's I love that now with going into like thrift stores and people getting rid of their CDs for like $1. It's just like you find the most amazing things. So
you're obviously still a fan of the physical copy of music like I am.
Oh yeah, very much so. I don't buy a lot of vinyl because I have a lot already.
Yeah.
But I mostly buy CDs now because CDs to me are superior than vinyl, and they're easier to truck around. They're But before then, I mean, like I used to go buy record shopping in the '80s and '90s when I got my first job. I was just like, I can go buy any records I want. So I would go. There was a place in Winnipeg called what was it? I forgot the name. Anyway, they had a vinyl dungeon. Everything down there was like a couple of bucks, and I would go down there and I would find copies of like Kiss's Rock and Roll Over in mint shape for $1 with the sticker still in it, and I was like, dang. So that's like, and I found like Bowie's Low for $2, stuff like that.
Amazing.
And I just bought all this stuff and I collected it and I kept hold of it I brought most of it with me when I left Winnipeg. And yeah, now I'm looking at this stuff and people are like, you're paying $15 for this beat up Peter Frampton record? Like what? Like I've got stuff that's in better shape that's probably worth more, but I paid a couple bucks for. But it's like, like now I'm not paying $30 or $40 for a vinyl reissue. That's just silly,
But
especially
that's the fun of shopping for physical music again, the memories it brings back, and I'm not
just
sure.
finding
like
stuff
a lot of stuff is
people
digital now, but not everything is.
There's a ton of stuff that's not digital. Here, actually, I don't know if I can reach it from here. Hang on. All right. Yeah, the studio's a bit cramped. These are the records that I just picked up in Value Village for a couple of bucks. Like this one. Boots Randolph.
Oh, okay.
It's a Christmas album. So I just like the album cover, and I've never seen this one before for Christmas records. So that should be interesting. This is I don't know if you remember this band, Deliverance.
I remember the name. I can't say I know the music, but
well, maybe not the music, but
I've seen that album before.
That guy, Paul Jantz.
Oh, Paul. Yeah, I totally remember him.
Yeah. I mean, they played him on the radio all the time in the early 90s. And I found out that he was in this Christian band called Deliverance in the early 80s,
And
1976.
one of the guys from the Odds played in his band.
Oh, yeah. Okay. I don't,
I think
yeah.
it might have been Craig Northey, or I'm not sure
Well,
who it was.
Craig Northey's played with everybody.
Yeah, and still does.
Yeah.
The
And then I
Trans
found,
Canada Highwaymen. Have you heard of them yet?
yeah, I've seen them. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
There's that one, Dino and the Satins.
I can't say I know that.
No, I don't either. But apparently this was a Charlottetown band, and Dino Dunsford is in the band. And this was one of the records I showed Richie that I work with at work, and he said, "Oh yeah, I got that record." He knows Dino, so it's like, okay, of course you know Dino. But like stuff like that, or I found these two. I bought a lot of 12-inch singles in the 80s.
Okay. Yeah.
By bands who had no business releasing 12-inch singles. Like I have almost every level 42. I almost every level 42 12-inch single, but like I have Yes 12-inch singles, dance remixes of Yes songs from their 90125 and Big Generator albums.
Yeah.
Why? Like I was a Yes fan, but I was buying everything back then. But those things shouldn't exist because nobody was dancing to that in the clubs, I'm sure. But I found this, which is just some sort of Teresa Mayuko Undercover 1986 on Power Records. I don't know who this is, but might be interesting. And then this one, another disco 12-inch, Carol Gianni, 1981 on Matra Records. So the only reason I bought this was because it was written by a guy named Pete Belot.
Okay.
He's co-wrote the song. He was the co-partner of Giorgio Moroder when he worked with Donna Summer.
Oh, okay.
So, I mean, he's kind of like a behind the scenes guy that was always there for those other stuff. So if his name is on that record, I'm like, this might be interesting.
Yeah.
so I'll just pick it up. So like stuff like that, when you're just kind of like browsing through Value Village or just going through thrift stores or finding neat CDs that are a couple bucks, I guess, well, for a couple bucks, I can take a chance, and sometimes it's more fun to just buy it and see what it's like, then looking it up on YouTube to see if anybody else has already posted it, to see if it's worth the money. If it's $1, like I'm not going to really worry about it.
No, if you make your way back to Ontario, can I make a recommendation? You head out to Oakville.
Okay.
And the greatest record store is there. It's called PCV Records, stands for Pop Culture Vulture Records.
Okay.
There's a guy that works in there. His name's James Clark. He's got one of the most incredible bands you will ever hear called the James Clark Institute. They're produced by Mo Berg.
Oh, okay. Well, yeah, that's good.
I actually got a couple of his CDs sold at Back Alley. So if you see a copy, I'd recommend picking it up. They got a very kind of a Beatle-esque sound to them, but I don't know. I think they're just an incredible band. Like if you get a chance to check them out online or something like that, I really
What
think
were they called?
The James Clark Institute.
Okay, I'll check them out.
I think you'd really like them. I really do.
Anybody Mo Berg's associated with, I'll check out.
Yeah, well, Mo's produced their past 2 albums.
Okay.
And the funny part is they just did a single in a video recently. I can't remember the name of it, but if you check it out, they have a steel guitar player in there. His name is Mickey Andrews.
Mm-hmm.
Mickey Andrews was crucial to the early career of Stompin' Tom.
Oh, okay. All roads back to Stompin'
It does, but he played with Tom at the Horseshoe in his early days, like the Horseshoe Tavern in the late 60s, early 70s. He was Tom's steel guitar player for years. Cool. And he was with Tom on his last tour, the one he did before he passed away. So and the fact that they got Mickey on that song and got him in the video is incredible. It's just, I can't believe he's still doing stuff today. Yeah,
well, I'll definitely check that out because I was a huge Mo Berg fan. Pursuit of Happiness and sent a Rundgren fan. Yeah, because he produced the first 2 records. So I said, well, I'll have to send these to you because I think he plays on them, but they're just like interested in anything to do with Todd, basically. I could talk to you. I also found a copy of. Go ahead.
I could talk to you forever, man. You're just such an encyclopedia of good music.
Well, I have a lot of bad music too, but there was a time there when I was deliberately buying bad music because it was, or just interesting outsider music, as I called it, just because it was different and I hadn't heard it before, like bands like the Shags, that kind, or just really, really outsider stuff like song poems. I have a bunch of song poem collections. I'm not sure. Do you know what song poems are?
No.
Song poems are, there was an entire industry around the 60s and 70s where on the back of magazines, they would have an ad where they said, send us your lyrics, we'll turn them into hit pop songs. It was mostly a scam. It was mostly a scam. They would, people thinking they were going to get like huge stardom out of this would write their terrible little songs and send them off into this little business where they would like hire a bunch of session musicians and they would knock off 30 of these songs a day, press them on the cheapest vinyl and send like 5 copies back to the person. And they were literally just making up the words and the lyrics as they went along. The band would see the chart maybe once and they would go through it and go, that's good enough, next, and then and so these records are all over the place because people, paid a lot of money, a couple $100 back in those days to get their songs pressed on these records, played by industry professionals. And, under the guise that they would be sent to radio stations and become hit singles, and none of them ever did. So, but there was an entire industry built, and a guy named Rod Keith was at the center of a lot of it. And a lot of the compilations have been released. There was a whole bunch of them came out in the 90s on CDs, and some of these songs are good in their badness. Like they have a nice charm to them. But like I have tons of that stuff. And there's a guy I know who has a blog who posts like even more, like tons more than I've got. So I mean, it's a little bit of everything. I've been listening to a lot of library music as well, which is background music played for television and radio in the 70s and 80s. Like the theme to the People's Court. Dum dum dum. That's actually a piece of library music. And it's on the KPM archives. I forget who does it originally, but like all the songs in Monty Python's The Holy Grail are sourced from library music. All of them.
Really? I did not know that.
Yeah, there was no score that was written for that movie. They just went into a library of recorded music and hand chose what they wanted. And that kind of stuff. So, I mean, and some of it's really, really good because like these are professional musicians and they were playing a lot of this stuff. I mean, it was played everywhere back then. And there is like, I sent a disc of it to Rob Pruce actually recently, a couple of years ago. I found an extra copy of an album of library music I knew he would love. So I sent it to him. And and it's really, you can get engrossed into it. But then, I mean, I love it. I mean, I found there was a label called Perry Music in Toronto, actually. Do you remember the show Size Small?
No.
It was a kid show in the early 80s. It was like mostly popular in the prairies. Anyway, all the songs on that show, which I grew up with, were sourced from the Perry Music Library. And I didn't discover this until maybe about a couple of years ago. And I absolutely flipped out. And I was like, these are the songs that Miss Helen on Size Small used to sing. And I was like, and I know these songs. And I was like, but they didn't have lyrics. They were all instrumental. She added lyrics on top of them. But now I'm trying to collect those. And it's really hard because that stuff is like, I mean, it's gone for the last 40 years. And you'd have to like, I did find one Perry Music album online. Somebody in like Scotland had it and sent it to me. So, but it just, where it makes its way around the world. I mean, people would buy the record libraries and use them in other countries. So if the records are still around, you can find them, but they're kind of hard to do now. And then they go up in price because everybody wants to get them.
Everybody wants them, yeah.
They become collectible.
Did you ever become obsessed with music you heard on the Dr. Demento show? Did you ever listen to it at all?
Oh yeah, Dr. Demento actually played a song of mine once.
Really?
Yeah. He played 2. But I used to listen to Dr. Demento in around the mid 80s. They used to play it on Sunday nights on one of the radio stations, and I used to tape it all the time. And when the CD compilations came out, I liked a lot of the silly music back then. I mean, I had all the Weird Al Yankovic albums, but he introduced me to bands like Frank Zappa, on
Yeah,
Dr. Demento.
Valley Girl got played on that show all the time.
Yeah, there was something he played off of Joe's Garage, and I was like, this is interesting. And it's like, but I was mostly taken with the playing of the performers, like the guys he had playing with him.
Yeah,
The musicianship was like phenomenal. I'm not much of a fan of Frank the person and the lyrics that he writes.
right.
he's a pretty mean guy, who doesn't like a lot of people. And there's a whole other like stuff about him, about what kind of a father he was and everything. So I kind of I hold my kind of like Zappa. I like his instrumental music a lot, but I don't really care much for the vocal stuff. But yeah, Dr. Demento introduced me to that, and probably all the other like Fish Heads and all the other classic outsider songs of that time. Yeah.
Because I remember being kids, my parents used to buy these like K-Tel compilations of like
I've got them all. Goofy Greats, Dumb Ditties,
yeah,
Funky Favorites. They're all over there on my shelf. Yeah,
Kooky Country. I remember that one.
Yeah, K-Tel wasn't actually. That was a lot of my way of getting popular songs of the time, because I couldn't afford, like, the singles were maybe a couple of dollars, but you could get a K-Tel record for $8 and you'd get 16 songs on it. I mean, it sounded terrible, but I mean, at least you got to hear it. I mean, I have the Certified Gold record, which introduced me to bands that I loved later, like XTC. And it had Talking Heads on there, and Stars on 45, and Roseanne Cash was on there. It's like all these bands that I would really get into much, much later, when I had, was able to buy more stuff. But like K-Tel was my gateway to a lot of the stuff that like I listen to today.
Well, you brought up XTC, like, because I think Sarah McLachlan does one of the best covers of XTC I've ever heard.
The Dear God cover?
Oh, it's unbelievable. She's really good at doing covers, I think, anyway.
Yeah, you know who my favorite cover artist actually is, also Canadian, is Laurie Cullen. Do you know her?
No.
She's married to Kurt Swinghammer.
Okay.
But she is just, she has the best voice, and her song selection is so good, and the arrangements are just, I've never heard anybody who can do. She took Rainy Day People by Gordon Lightfoot and turned it into like this sad, like porch ballad, and it's just ethereal sounding, and it blows any other cover. She's my favorite cover artist, hands down. And she does a lot of different stuff. Like she did a Shania Twain song that I didn't even recognize until it was halfway through it. So I would, she has a Bandcamp with all her stuff on it. I would highly recommend checking her out.
Well, I'm gonna try and get your brain going for this one. One of the guys that just joined Whiskey Jack recently was Doug Cameron. Do you remember him?
The violinist?
No, he did a song called Mona with the Children.
Oh, the other Doug Cameron.
Yeah.
Yes. Yeah, Matt actually mentioned that song the other day. I think I had heard it in passing a long time ago, but he was, the Doug Cameron I knew was a violinist. Did an album called Mil Amores around 1990 or so, but they're different guys. So yeah.
Well, Doug is known for Mona with the Children, but he's actually a lot more well known for writing the song Ants in Your Pants. They used to get played on YTV all the time. I don't know if you remember that. It was a children's song.
No.
He's actually made more from that than he did from Mona with the Children, and that was not.
Oh, I don't doubt that. Bruce Coburn said his most popular song that made him the most money was the Franklin song.
Really?
Yeah.
I thought it would have been
Lovers in a Dangerous Time.
Yeah, the one Bare Naked Ladies did, because it gets played constantly.
Nope, Franklin has been the one that has made him the most money.
Really?
Well, because there's the back end royalty. Every time it gets played, he gets paid.
Okay, so that's right.
And if it gets played not just in Canada but around the world, then like that's one of the ways a lot of musicians can survive nowadays, is getting licensing.
Kate Bush, good example.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, like, she's lucky she owns her masters, because when that hit, I mean, like, she's like, she was already very comfortable because she has a very strong fan base, but that just became unreal. Like that happens once in a lifetime.
I remember talking to Gord Depp from the Spoons. He was doing an 80s cruise or something like that with a bunch of, and he was saying, you just want to hold signs up at your shows and say, please use my song in Stranger Things.
Well, that actually kind of reminds me of something Mo Berg said once about I'm adult now, and somebody
Yeah.
asked him, he's like, "Do you resent having playing that song all the time?" And he goes, "Well, he goes, no, like, it was because it was my I'm lucky to have a hit, you know,
Yeah.
basically." Like at least I had one. Like I goes, I don't understand people who complain about the hit song that they wrote that other people like. You know?
Yeah.
So I don't want to play my hit song anymore. But yeah.
I also remember seeing Mo Berg in Pursuit of Happiness on one of the Much Music things. I think it might have been Snowjob.
Mm.
But I remember in the middle of I'm an Adult Now, they played like a medley of Canadian classics. They played you remember the Headpins, Don't It Make You Feel Like Dancing?
Yep.
And they were doing Teenland, the Northern Pike song.
Yeah, I remember that one too.
And then I remember seeing the Northern Pikes on Much Music, and they were doing Teenland, and in the middle of that, they were singing "I'm an Adult Now."
That was
Which I'm
probably
like,
planned.
are these guys good friends? They must be friends or something like that.
They're all friends. Yeah, they all know each other. That's kind of like when Tragically Hip got on SNL. They were started playing a little bit of the Rio Statics on one
Yep.
of their
Okay.
songs. So
Yeah.
just as a little nods and send a little royalty off to them, you know.
Well, those are also two. And the Tragically Hip and Blue Roadie are bands that I've been turned on to other bands by those two. Like
Yeah.
I got turned on to the Sky Diggers because of the Tragically Hip and Blue Rodeo because they've talked about them and toured with them. And
Oh, I knew the Sky Diggers when that happened, when they were just came out, like same around time Crash Vegas were big. You remember
oh
that?
yeah, I do remember Crash Vegas. Yeah.
Yeah, Michelle McAdory's got her own, has a couple of solo albums, and then of course Colin Cripps went off into the stratosphere playing with Jim Cuddy and doing all sorts of stuff.
Yeah, amazing.
But
So
yeah,
yeah, so much to talk about. Man, I could talk to you all day about music. You're very
well,
knowledgeable and you know all kinds of stuff and you're not just, oh, it's
well, it's
unbelievable.
just I've gone through a lot of phases of like I listen to something and then I kind of get bored and then I go looking for other things, and then you'll just hit something that you hear it and kind of go, oh, what's that? And then I'll just kind of I went down like a huge synthwave hole around 10 years ago because I heard
Yeah.
one song by a guy named Zach Robinson is his name. He actually does the score for Cobra Kai.
Oh, right. I was
Yeah,
wearing that t-shirt yesterday.
okay, yeah, he had an album before the Cobra Kai stuff. He was in a band called DAD, which was just him, and it
Okay.
was like a synthwave album of like all instrumental mostly.
Yeah.
And it's on Bandcamp. It's called The Construct, and it was like I listened to it. It's like this is really good, and then it sent me down like a whole hole listening to other synthwave artists, and then I started like making my own music just for fun. And it's just fun the way things can just like push you off. You hear one thing and it's just a jumping off point into something else, and then it's never ending, right? It just keeps going. Like, and I'll never have enough time to listen to all the records I have, but I want to keep them anyway in case
For
I ever
sure.
come to the point where like, oh, I feel like getting into that now,
Yeah. What was it? I was the other day I always get feeds from the Horseshoe Tavern about gigs coming up there.
Mm-hmm.
And I saw something about a band called the Ocean Blue,
Yeah.
who I'd never heard of before, but I listened to their new song and it reminded me, I was like, this is like Echo and the Bunnymen.
Yeah, Ocean Blue, they're a really good band. Do you know the band The Orchids?
I've heard of the band. I don't know of their songs, but I've
Yeah,
heard the
they were
name for sure.
Yeah, they were part of a label called Sarah Records that was in the UK
Right.
based. And there was another band called Heavenly that were
Okay.
really good, and they're all like of that sort of like very British, what they would call twee pop sound
Okay.
of the
Yeah.
early '90s. Ocean Blue are right in with them. That's I fell in love with a band called Acid House Kings
Okay.
from the mid 2000s that were all kind of like throwbacks to that entire stuff. So yeah, I mean, I was my friend. I was at my friend Doug Hoyer's place.
Mhm.
He's a local musician here too. He just put out a single recently, and he came from Edmonton before, but he's lived all over. But he lives here now, and he was showing me some of his new songs that he was working on. And I said, "Have you heard the Orchids?" And he goes, "No." And I pulled it up on Spotify, and he goes, "I love this.
Yeah.
This is this is totally up my alley." It's like, yep, I can kind of tell because it's got that same sort of sound to it. There's like electronica beats in there, but like hushed vocals.
Yeah.
And really melodic, very poppy, and just is really, really good. I recommend people check anything on the Sarah Records label. I would recommend people go check out because a lot of that stuff is it's very very cult following, but it
Yeah.
should be more well known.
Well, I think it was you guys that turned me on to Noble Oak.
I love Noble Oak. I just
So do
discovered
I.
them out of nowhere. I think they showed up on a Spotify playlist. And I said, like, what's this? And then it's like, whoa, this is really good. So
It's unbelievable. I love the music. The
yeah,
other
it
band
kind
that
of.
got, oh, sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
Another band I wanted to run by you because my favorite band of all time is Spirit of the West.
Oh yeah, I guess
Um,
you know Faithless is turning 30 this week.
I have a poster on my wall from Faithless, and it's autographed by the band. I think it came from a record store, actually.
Oh, okay, yeah, we
Um,
had. I got to meet John Mann. Hung out at CBC Vancouver a lot, so I used to see him a lot when he was
Oh,
there.
I was going to say, if you were in Vancouver that long, you must have had run-ins with those guys or seen them
Oh yeah,
play a few times. I saw them every time they came to the Toronto area when I was living in Ontario.
yeah.
They let
He
me
was well.
propose to my wife at one of their shows.
Oh, nice.
Yeah,
Yeah, no, John Mann everybody loved him in Vancouver. He was always around. He was not, if he wasn't doing music stuff, he was acting. So
yeah.
yeah.
But
But anyway, so
they turned me on to the Wonder stuff.
Wonder Stuff are good too. You know who actually turned me onto the Wonder Stuff was Kirsty McCall.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
The
I don't.
the Pogues Christmas
Yep.
song they play at Christmas all the time. She
Yeah,
sang on that.
Yeah, I mean, like I had known her with the Pogues, but then I don't know how it came about. I would think it was like recently after she was killed, and then we
Yeah.
kind of like started looking into her catalog at that point. I mean, obviously too late, but and discovering all this great music. I had known her song with the Pogues, but I didn't really know her stuff before. I didn't know that she wrote "They Don't Know," the big hit single for Tracy Ullman.
Oh, really? She wrote that? Okay.
She wrote that, and it actually appears on the Tracy Ullman version, singing the high part because Tracy Ullman can't sing it.
Oh, okay. Paul
But
McCartney
yeah,
was in that video too. I
he
remember
was in
that.
that video. Yeah,
Yeah.
I would highly recommend. There's a box set coming out now of her stuff. But I mean, even if whatever you can find on Kirsty McCall's stuff, all her solo material is just great.
I've been hearing that song quite a bit lately. Like I haven't heard that Tracy Ullman song forever, and I've been hearing it lately.
Huh? I
On
don't know why. Maybe
Stingray
it's
on Stingray stations have been playing it again.
weird. Maybe it's been on a TV show somewhere.
It's just like, is it me or wasn't that a party really making a resurgence these days? Because I've heard it like 4 times this week.
The Irish Rovers one?
Yeah.
Really?
You remember that crazy song? It was so big back in the early 80s. I remember my mom going out and buying the 45.
I have it on a KTEL record. It was included on Full Tilt with KTEL.
But I heard it 4 times yesterday on radio stations.
Wow. That was around the same time I was listening to like Loverboy were big.
Yeah.
And the Powder Blues Band. Jeez. There was a record I had called Rockin' on the Airwaves. It's all Canadian. It's like Burton Cummings is on there.
Okay.
Fine State of Affairs. Triumph is on there. Headpins. Minglewood Band.
Okay.
Like all that stuff. So yeah, those are records I grew up with. So that was the only way I heard a lot of music and introduced to a lot of Canadian music too.
Yeah, that's true. And then there's some bands I didn't even know were Canadian. I didn't know Street Heart were Canadian.
Oh, really?
No.
Well, yeah, well, they were huge in Winnipeg because apparently that's where I think that's where they're from. I'm not sure. Maybe I might be wrong on that, but they're one of those like legendary, like Max Webster, same sort of thing.
Yeah.
Same time. Geez, I was going to say something. I forgot what it was.
Winnipeg, the Watchmen were the only band I remember from the 90s coming from Winnipeg.
Oh yeah, and Crash Test Dummies.
Were they? Oh, they were from Winnipeg, weren't they? That's right.
Yeah, they were everywhere. Like I was actually in a band once called Johnny God, that was spelled GAWD. It was me and my brother playing bass and drums, and there was 2 sisters on lead guitars and singing called Kristen and Karen Kruger.
Okay.
And they, one of them was dating Chris Brett, I think his name was, who was an engineer who worked at his own recording studio in Brad Roberts' house.
Okay.
So we went they wanted to record there once. So it's just like, okay. So we show up there and we record in the basement, which is a little basement studio. The mixing board is on the 2nd floor in the living room, and it's connected to the kitchen. So we just go through a couple of runs of the song. We go upstairs, and we're just kind of hanging out in the doorway listening to it. And then Brad Roberts comes down the staircase that leads to the kitchen from the 3rd floor.
Right.
And he's like carrying a martini glass, and he's in a bathrobe, and he just kind of walks over, and we look at him and I go, "Hey," and he goes, "Hey," and then gets his drink and goes back upstairs. So it's like, okay. that was interesting. So
That's an awesome story.
yeah, I'd like, I know we just continued on what we're doing. It's just like that was such a surreal moment, you know.
Yeah.
But
That's
I mean,
awesome.
and this was when they were at their peak too. So like, but yeah, which didn't last very long, unfortunately. But yeah, but a lot of the Winnipeg bands, Chocolate Bunnies from Hell were another popular band.
I never
Uh,
heard of them, but
they were kind of like a punk rock
okay.
glam thing, more popular for their live show than their recordings.
Okay.
Fred Penner was big. Do you remember a guy named Rocky Roletti?
No.
He was a guy. His real name was Peter Jordan. He was actually worked for CBC as a reporter, but his side gig was this rock persona called Rocky Roletti.
Okay.
And he had a couple of albums and a couple of singles even on A&M Records. So like he was up there with like Doug and the Slugs and
Okay.
like all that kind of stuff. Peter Pringle, you know,
Yeah.
Craig Runke, all that kind of thing. So yeah, I mean, like Winnipeg, that was their like, well, Crash Test Dummies became the claim to fame for Winnipeg. And the Watchmen were hugely popular too. Around the same time, like Wood Sloan would come to town and they would do a show with them. So
Yeah.
yeah, I wasn't much into the Watchmen because they were a little bit on the more alternative rock side, which I wasn't too much into. In fact, do you remember the New Meanies or the?
Yes, I do remember that band. Yeah.
Yeah, two of the guys in that band I went to high school with, and Damon, who actually has played on a bunch of bands since then. I was working at the Sam's Record Band, and he came in once when the album had just come out, and they were signed to EMI.
Okay.
And I said, "Well, how's the thing going?" It just like goes, "Man, if I have another person ask me for a free copy, I can't pay my rent this month." It's like, wow, rock and roll lifestyle, sign me up. They're like, wow, like no, you know, like that doesn't sound glamorous at all, you know. So, and then they got dropped after the first album. So I mean, that's like it's one of those things where like you dream about being on a major label and like being a big rock star and stuff, but it's not all it's cracked up to be.
No, it's not. One of the guys I talked to quite a bit, he's become a good friend of mine. His name is David McMillan.
Mm-hmm.
I've interviewed him a couple of times, but every time I try and do a Zoom call, his internet's just terrible. But he got started with me talking to him because he worked for EMI in the marketing, and he got thrown to Stompin' Tom when he came out of retirement, when Dean Cameron signed Stompin' Tom to EMI. But he was with every band back in the 90s. He was with Tea Party, I Mother Earth.
Oh yeah.
But he's also like, he's kind of like you in terms of music. He's an encyclopedia about it. But he worked for Attic back in the day. One of his first bands he worked with was Chalk Circle.
Oh yeah. Chalk Circle on Attic. That's funny. I remember them being on Duke Street.
No, that was Duke Street, but they weren't on Attic. But yeah, he was with Duke Street for a while too. But then he was working for, I think he said he was working for Virgin. And actually, funny, it goes back. He was one of the last things he did there. He worked for a Van Morrison concert.
Oh, okay.
So he was being interviewed at EMI for the job, and I guess Dean Cameron walked in on the interview and said, he goes, "How was Van Morrison last night?" And he goes, "Oh, it was great," and stuff like that. And then he says, so he goes, "I got a question for you." He goes, "How'd you get Stompin' Tom out of retirement?" And he gave him the job right away. And he goes, "That's your first client right there." So he said, but he's got a lot of stories about working with him too. But
I bet.
Oh, Dave's a great guy. He knows so much about music too. Like he's got a Rock and Roll Hall of Fame in his basement. It's unbelievable.
Huh. Well, yeah, it's back in the internet when those days when you really had to kind of discover music, you kind of remembered a lot of the things that you came across because there wasn't a lot of options. Like if I bought a CD back then, I would listen to it like, you know, like a gazillion times because it was going to be a while before I was able to buy another one. And now since streaming and everything, it's really hard to keep up with stuff and remember what you listen to. Yeah, because it's just not the same experience. I mean, that's why physical is great because you actually hold it, you can look at it, you remember you have it, and it kind of becomes a part of your memory, and then it becomes more meaningful to you.
Well, Dave worked with Boot Sauce. Do you remember them?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, he was telling me about the story behind the cover of their Brown album.
With the bull on it?
Yeah.
No,
Like he said, that was amazing too. He goes, "The album is shit, so we'll just make it brown." That was the whole story behind it. It was all. He's got some
Yeah.
great stories too.
Wow. Boot Sauce is a name I haven't heard for a long time.
Yeah, they used to get played on Much Music all the time. I wouldn't have heard of Boot Sauce without Much
Oh
Music.
yeah. They had their cover of Everyone's a Winner, I think.
Oh, that was their big hit, I guess.
Or no, or is it? Yeah, it was that was their big hit. It was a cover of the Hot Chocolate song.
Well, maybe you know this. Whatever happened to Sons of Freedom?
Sons of Freedom.
I love that band. They played them on Much Music all the time.
I'm not as familiar with that band. Were they?
They did a song called "You're No Good." It was awesome.
Okay, I'll have to look that up. Maybe I've heard it before and I just didn't click with the name. But yeah, I'll check into that.
Oh, I thought they were going to be huge, but I don't know whatever happened to them. But they used to get played a lot. Again, Much exposing you to bands you'd never heard of. You know, it was. I just wish there was another avenue for that. I guess there is. It's on the internet if you look hard enough, but
it's not the same. It's. I mean, the internet. I mean, the only way I discover things on like Spotify, for example, is if someone who is already a fan of the band I'm listening to has discovered something, and it says people have also listened to this artist. But it's like, oh, that's the only way I'm going to discover something that I'll probably like. Because if I just take like curated playlists from people I don't know who they are,
sure,
I don't know, I'm probably not going to like that. But I mean, back in the days when people knew how to program radio and video programs, you know, you could kind of just put on Much Music for an hour and you'll probably hear something you like, you know?
Yeah.
So, and yeah, just like that was the only way to discover things. But now, I mean, it's kind of like a physical library versus a digital library is completely different because digital library, you have to know what you're looking for. Otherwise you can't find it. Physical library, you can literally just walk around the walls and look at everything and just pick something up. Go, oh, that looks interesting. I'll see what this is about.
I mean, I like digital music because you can assemble it on your phone and listen to it anywhere.
Yeah, it's very convenient. But you have to know what you're looking for.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah. Otherwise, it's going to be hit or miss. It's like, oh, maybe you could spend an hour looking for something and you find nothing. But I mean, if I was like walking around the shelves of a library and just picking out stuff off the shelf, which I used to do all the time, I would discover things I had no idea existed, you know?
Yeah.
So, and no one would ever show you those things because half of them weren't in streaming services, you know? So half of them don't even know who owns it.
That's the fun of shopping for physical music is going and looking and browsing like and it just seems to be gone, you know? It's not really something you do online, so.
I mean, I like to back alley used to have the record store here in Charlottetown used to have a $1 bit. I used to love going through that because that would find some really neat stuff in there, and they took it away. So and now it's just like, oh, it's like I can search alphabetically for things I already know I want, but like it's not the same. I like the element of surprise and discovery when I'm looking for music, which is why I'll still go browse the Value Village vinyl, even though it's a horrible condition, but and get through all the Nana Muscuri records. But once you do, there's usually something in there that is different, right? They're just like, oh, I've never seen this before, and if it's in good shape and it's only $1, and it's like, okay, sure.
Have you ever looked at that Facebook group? It's just called Bizarre Album Covers.
No, I haven't, but I probably have a couple of them already.
I've seen some of them at Value Village, actually.
Oh yeah, I do buy them if they're really cool because I bought a Pizza Stop Go. There's this one album cover of a guy standing on the ladder next to a pizza sign. Yeah, he's like the organ player at that pizza parlor, and it's an album of him playing the organ in the pizza parlor. And it's somebody showed it once on an album cover, and it's like, and I found it, and I was like, I'm gonna buy this. So it's. I mean, he does a Star Wars medley on it, which is kind of cool. But the rest of it's like tie a yellow ribbon on the organ, you know, that type of thing. So,
well, there's a great clip of the Graham Norton show. He's got Katie Lang, and I forgot who else is on there. They're looking at ridiculous-looking album covers, and I was laughing at that. That's what kind of got me obsessed with looking for just ridiculous-looking album covers.
I used to I would buy ridiculous albums just because the cover looked really funny. Yeah. But yeah, I don't always do that anymore because I've got too many albums.
Yeah,
there's only so much space.
Yes, there is. That's the only problem. There is so much space. Man, Lee, I can't thank you for joining me today. It's enough for joining me. It's great to talk to you.
Oh, it's great. Yeah, I noticed we should probably wrap this up. It's been a while.
Yeah, no, that's okay. That's what I love. I hope to maybe run into you around town one day. Who knows? I mean,
Oh, probably, yeah.
it's not that big of a city.
Nope. Eventually run into somebody somewhere. But yeah, no, thanks for having me on. It's been fun to talk about this stuff. I hope people, not
For
too
sure.
boring.
No, it's fantastic. This is what I live for. I live for doing this. I'm doing this for fun. I'm enjoying it. I don't know where I'm going with it, but
Yeah.
it's been fun to do.
As
I
long
can't
as you
bel-
enjoy it, that's the main thing.
And I can't believe who I've talked to already. Who knows who's gonna want to talk to me one day. So
Yeah, might as well.
yeah. All right.
Great.
Thanks a lot, Lee. Talk to you soon.
Yeah, thanks
All
very
right.
much. Okay, bye-bye.
Bye.